Hi there, it's Andrew Burke from Code School Halifax again, and in our last session we covered a lot of the basics of JavaScript, so variables and functions and arrays and objects, but it was kind of abstract, and I know it was a lot of information kind of quickly, but we're going to start using these things now on our actual web page. So hopefully things will start to make a little more sense as we actually see these different elements in action. So here we go. Now we're getting back to the browser. Here we are back at our browser, back at our web page, and we've still got the console open. We're not going to do things so much in the console this time, but we're going to have it open to see messages if they should show up. And here's our page, and we're now going to start doing things back on the Visual Studio Code side of things. So let's first get rid of these. We know these work, so that's good. We can get that out of the way. And let's make ourselves a little function just to sort of make sure we know how these things work. So function, say hello, and just have it console log something. Okay, so there we go, simple function. Doesn't even have any arguments, it's just bracket, bracket. Okay, you always need to have the brackets for a function though. That's sort of how JavaScript knows that it's a function. And now we're going to find a way to call that function, because if we just load the page, it doesn't do anything yet. Because this is now wrapped up in a function. It's not going to run it immediately. It has to be actually invoked. So we can do that down in our HTML, and there's various ways, but a simple common way is to do with a button. Okay, and the way to do that is just do input type equals button, and then value is going to be the label on the button, and then on click is going to be what actually is triggered, and usually that's a function call. You can put some JavaScript in here directly, but it's a good idea to not put too much JavaScript directly on your HTML page, like we talked about earlier. And in this case, we're calling a function. So what's nice is we have a little bit of JavaScript that basically calls a bunch of other JavaScript that's on your scripts file, which has the space there to be much bigger. So this is one of those weird little self-closing tags. Okay, so there's our tag. Let's save that and save this and reload our page. There's our little click me button. Okay, it's very small, but that's okay. And if we click that, it says hi there. So you see what happened there is this is an input. We clicked it and it has a little on-click attribute, which then runs whatever's in this as JavaScript. And we called this function, say hello, and then it went over to here and it outputted hi there. Okay. That's great, but we want to actually run things when the page first loads or something like that. We don't necessarily want to have to wait for a button to be clicked. And to handle this, there's various ways of doing it, but we're actually going to include a new library. So libraries are basically, it's sort of like the Google fonts that we included up here already. They're sort of like pre-made sets of code. People write functions and various things that you can use yourself to save you a lot of time and trouble. And one of the things with JavaScript is it was, made by a committee, designed by committee over several years, and it's the main way you interact with things on web pages, but it often is kind of doesn't do a very good job at it. And so over the years, people have made these various libraries that make certain things a lot easier. And one of these libraries that's very popular is called jQuery, and we're going to include that here in our project just to make a bunch of things easier to work with. And we'll just go find it. Now you can go to jQuery directly themselves and download a bunch of files and install them in your, put them in your application folder and link them directly. But what's a common thing to do nowadays is you simply link the hosted files from somewhere else, such as Google. Sort of like we did with the Google fonts that we're downloading from here. You can also download code libraries from Google, which hosts a lot of these things for us, which is kind of nice because then they get to worry about uptime and all that. Well, we don't have to worry so much. And a quick, easy way to do that is to just search for jQuery and CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. Okay, so that is a way of hosting things in various places. And you can see here, there's a whole bunch of different things. And if you go down and look for Developers Google Hosted Libraries, okay, and you can see here, I've already looked at it before. And it's got all sorts of libraries they like to have, okay? And if you just search on this page for jQuery, they have all sorts of things for all sorts of things. Here's jQuery. And all you need to do is take the snippet here, copy it, and then paste it into your file up in the head section. And just like we did with the fonts, it's good to do it before your specific file for your project. Okay, so just pasting it in there. And now we have jQuery, and then we have our scripts file. So this is now going to be smart enough to know that we've got jQuery going on, and we can start using the jQuery functions. Okay. Now, jQuery does some interesting things. jQuery lets you select items in a very similar way to CSS, which is a lot better than the native JavaScript way of doing things. So instead of just saying, hi there, let's change this a little bit. And let's take our global count area, and we're going to put a little message in global count. Okay. So the way you do that with jQuery is use $. So there's going to be $signs all over the place. jQuery sort of hijacked the $sign character to say, this is jQuery stuff. And in brackets, we then set up in a little text thing that looks a lot like a selector. In fact, you can use basically the same kinds of selectors you've been doing here and use them right here in jQuery, right here in our JavaScript. So this $sign and then brackets is actually a function call because there's a really epic function behind $sign, okay? But don't worry about that. All you have to think about is $sign and then a selector and then dot and then do things, okay? So in this case, let's make global count hide. Okay, so that is also another function you see there. Okay, so let's maybe change this name to do things. I know that's not exactly the most exciting name for things, but it's a bit more accurate than say hello. Okay, so we've saved this and saved this. Once again, once you start dealing with multiple files, it's good to remember to save things. Close this. Let's roll here. And if we click here, what it should do is hide the thing called global count. There it goes. It's disappeared. Okay. And then if we reload the page, it's back again. And there's lots of different ways to do things with jQuery. So jQuery has a lot of visual effects you can do. So for example, fade out. See that? It faded out. You can even give it parameters of how long you want it to take to fade out. It's in milliseconds. So 2000 is 2 seconds worth. And there it fades out. You see that? So you can call these things and set up things to show and hide and whatever. But wouldn't it be nice if we could sort of have this happen not just when you click a button, but when the page first loads? There's a whole separate way to do that that jQuery has, which is kind of handy. Because it's done so often, jQuery even has a special shortcut for that. And that is, looks something like this. Oops. Okay. Now the thing is, if we decide to maybe try to make something show or hide or whatever, right? So if we took this and just put it out here just on the page, okay? Maybe go a little faster. When we run our page, it doesn't actually make anything disappear. The reason for that is that because the script file is added here, it tries to run this script right at the beginning of the page before it's actually set up any of the content on the page, right? So it runs this, tries to do the fade out, but there's nothing to fade out yet because we're running the script up here. Now to solve this, a lot of people put their scripts at the bottom of the page, which is fine, but there's often a lot of pages have separate resources that are being added, and there's all sorts of other things, and it takes a while for some things to render and all sorts of stuff like that. So what is often better is you want to actually wait for the page to finish loading before you actually try to do things, okay? And that is what this is. So this is once again another little jQuery thing. So it's got the $sign, and then it's got our brackets, but inside it, we have this sort of function-y thingy, and we're going to explain what that is later, but for now, just hang with me here and trust me, this will make a bit more sense later. And in here, we can then take this, put this in here, okay, called global count fade out. And so if we load the page now, okay, just as soon as we load, it starts to fade it out, which is a little pointless, but that's okay. We'll get to the reasons why for that later. And you can even put this in here and go do things, if I could type it properly, do things. Okay. And now we don't have to wait for the click. We can have it actually do stuff immediately. Okay. So that's handy. And you can basically put a whole bunch of logic in here to do stuff. Okay. And the way I like to explain how jQuery sort of does things is, remember we're talking about JavaScript, so it's verbs and nouns and stuff. So this is the thing that you're going to act on, and it's a selector just like CSS. In this case, it's global count. We could change it to boxed section, for example. See, it's exactly the same kind of CSS, which means both things are going to disappear. Okay, so that's kind of neat. If you reload. But, you know, we can do various other things like that. But what we have here is the thing we're going to act on, or the things, depending, a dot, and then the things we're going to do to it, and then how we're going to do it. So keep that in mind when you're doing jQuery things. Now, the jQuery has tons of different functions and all sorts of things you can do. We're not going to explore too many of those because we have other things we're getting to right now. But another big thing we're going to do first is, let's go back to making this global count again. And instead of fading it out or making things disappear, let's swap in some content. Okay. I cannot type today. I think my fingers are cold. Anyway, so what this is going to do is it says, okay, the thing with global count, which is that div on the page right here, is going to swap out anything inside of it. And that's why it says HTML. Any HTML inside of it, which is currently just a bunch of text, that's fine. And then it's going to replace it with whatever's in here. Okay, so when this runs, it should do things, which is going to trigger this do things function. And it's going to find global count, and it's going to replace everything. So instead of global count, it's say this is from JavaScript. Okay, so let's save that, save this, reload the page. You can see here it says this is from JavaScript rather than global count, because we've told it to do this on the do things side of things. Okay, so this is step one of our big process, because our big process here for the rest of this JavaScript thing is we're going to go find some information off the internet, and we'll explain that in the next session. We're going to get that information, we're going to process that information, we're going to slice and dice it and rearrange it, and then we're going to output that information into these sections. Okay, and the main way we're going to do that is with finding the section and then HTML and then a string. Okay, so this is a string. We're going to build up a string with a whole bunch of content and maybe even some HTML. And we're going to then put that into these various things on the page. Okay, so that's how that works. And we can even do, if we want to do by, well, let's keep that one there. And let's do another one, which is by country, HTML. And you can put HTML in here. So let's make this a P and a /P and then another P and then another /P. Okay. And you notice everything has a semicolon at the end. That's important. So let's reload this page. Okay. And you can see the content. This is from JavaScript. This is how it got contents, and it's now a bit bigger, and you can see we've got P's and everything. So you see, this is how we can set things up. Okay. And for example, we can also, and this is important here, let's set up a variable. First message. Our second message. Okay, and we'll get rid of this, and let's replace this with second message. What about second message? Okay, so here we go. First message, second message. And if we reload the page, okay, this is from a JavaScript variable. This is from another JavaScript variable. Okay, so you see we've set up variables, and we can do things with these variables. We can get them from other places. We can pass them in. We can slice and dice them. And then at the end, when we're ready, we just put them in as parameters in here, and then they get set into these various elements on the page. Okay? Hope that makes some sense. That's sort of the key to what we're going to be doing. Okay? Now, let's get rid of this click me thing, because we don't really need that anymore. Oops. There we go. Let's make sure we're clean. Sometimes hard when we have a smallish window to work with. Okay? Here we can then, now because everything's being triggered at the beginning, let's start thinking about what we want to have do. So instead of do things, we'll get rid of that. Let's have another function. So when the page loads, the first thing we want to do is go and find our data. Now we don't have any data yet, but we're going to do that very soon. Okay? Fetch data. And let's have a function called fetch data. And for now, we're just going to say console log fetching data. Okay, fetching data. Here's back to our contents again. And maybe we can just even down here, we can have another function. Write results. And in that one, we'll console log, whoops. Actually, we'll do like we did before. Global count, HTML. So I'm putting the cart before the horse here a little bit. I'll make a var called count entry, and for now equals, we'll just make it a placeholder. Okay. And we'll have another var called country. And our by country. Okay, so we're going to fill these in with real stuff later, but this part here is going to basically stay the same for the rest of our project because we're actually writing things out. So we can also call write results from inside our fetch data function. So the page is going to load. It's going to call this at the beginning, which is going to then call fetch data. That comes into here. We're going to write out fetching data, and then there's going to be some magic, which we'll get to later. And then it's going to, once it's got the data, it's then going to write results. And that's a separate function, which is going to eventually actually format and properly organize the data that we're getting in and write it out to our sections on the page. Okay? And I like to, and I'm just getting started, put console logs everywhere at all the different functions just to see that they're working properly. Okay, so here we go. Fetching data, writing results, global count data in here, country data in here. Okay, so now we've set things up and we're getting ready to roll with our real data, which we'll be covering next time. So I hope that makes some sense. I know we're covering a lot, but you can see here functions that we talked about last time are sort of the way everything fits together. We have our jQuery that's letting us do things and running things only once everything's fully loaded. And we have our functions calling other functions. We have our console log. We have our data being put in, and we're assigning some of that data to elements on the page using jQuery's fancy CSS style selectors. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. Now, before we get any further, let's put this all in our version control so that if we make a mess, we can fix it up later and roll back to where we were. So script is new. We haven't added it yet, so let's add that. And index has changed a little bit. You can always review what your changes are here. So we've only added the script libraries, right? All the new stuff is all in the JavaScript. And let's put that in. So we've got our staged changes that are ready to roll. I'll note and commit it. And now we've got ourselves a safe fallback point so that if we make a big mess, we can always come back to here, which is always important when you're programming. So I hope that made some sense, and looking forward to the next one where we're actually going to start trying to find this data and pull it in and start doing things with it. All right. Talk to you soon.